So, for those of you who haven't heard the news, we're getting more Lord of the Rings movies. And as a lifelong Tolkien fan, I'm just so excited. So I was actually thinking I wasn't going to make any... Originally I was going to do a video. Then I thought, maybe I just don't need to talk about this. I still haven't actually finished the Rings of Power rewrites. And so I was thinking maybe I could just leave this whole thing for a couple of months, maybe once we get more information out. Then I read The Lord of the Rings is getting the Star Wars treatment. And it's a good thing that that's so reassuring, because as we all know, all the Disney Star Wars stuff has just been doing great. It's just all been wonderful. Every last movie. All right, enough with the jokes. So this is the same problem that I sort of articulated in my concerns video for the Rings of Power. I brought up two major concerns. One, any adaptation of an author, but especially an author like Tolkien, who is very intentional, very purposeful in all of the different things that he made, from basically the themes and the world itself. I mean, he dedicated literally decades to the creation of Middle-earth, all the way to the individual characters and the plot points and just simply everything that happens. You have to be really respectful to that sort of story in order for any sort of adaptation to work. As such, I just simply have one question. Do any of these stories that are going to be told, do they need to be told? To which the answer is no, they don't. They don't need to be told for the completion of anything in The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings functions perfectly as a narrative from beginning to end when you only read The Hobbit and read The Lord of the Rings. And by the same token, if you watch the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, they all function perfectly fine as a story. You could argue that maybe there's some fleshing out that you could do or things like that, but the problem is that no, there isn't. There isn't really fleshing out that you need to do, or really that you can do in a way that's going to enrich the story, primarily because of the fact that all that fleshing out is done by Tolkien in the way that's most suitable to it. And this leads me to my main question. Why is any of this getting made in the first place? And the simple answer? For money. This isn't being made for an artistic purpose. This isn't being made because of the fact that some director or producer in Hollywood really loves Lord of the Rings and really wants to flesh out the world of Middle-earth and create new stories. They don't even need to be brand new, but just new stories to add depth to an already rich world. That's not the reason for why this is made. That's not the reason for why Rings of Power was made, and we all saw how that worked out. It's being made primarily for monetary recuperation amongst the Hollywood execs. And I think it's important to note that, at the very least, in my own personal opinion, which is a phrase that people keep using even in this discussion, and I hate it, but from my own viewpoint, let's say, one of the main reasons for why the Peter Jackson trilogy worked as well as it did, and again, I still don't think it was flawless. I think that there are some areas in which it probably could have been improved. I've talked very briefly in my Rings of Power videos about what some of those things might be. Which, to be fair, it's mostly just lines of dialogue, but this is all a discussion for another time. The point is that the reason for why the Lord of the Rings movies worked as well as they did is because of the fact that Peter Jackson was so keen on making them, and making them well, using all the director's knowledge on good storytelling that he had developed throughout his life. And because of the fact that he was genuinely trying to make good movies which held true to the books as well as he could make them in a way that was reasonable from his point of view. And again, I think that there were some mistakes every once in a while, but genuinely he did a very good job, and that is the reason for why the Lord of the Rings movies are so well respected. I'm not going to pretend as if all movies and all franchises are just made for purely artistic endeavors and there is no reason for monetary recuperation or anything along those lines in the minds of the directors or the writers or anyone like that. That's silly, obviously. All movies, at least from an executive position and from a sort of business standpoint, are obviously made to make money. That's sort of the financial incentive that's involved there. That was involved in the Lord of the Rings movies, of course. That's involved in some of the greatest movies of all time. But it is wrong to say that they are simply made for financial gain. That is simply wrong, because when movies are simply made for financial gain, and you don't have at least one really good artist making executive decisions, you inevitably end up with trash. And that is more or less been proven by the past 20 years of filmmaking. And I'm not going to pretend as if, again, the 20th century was this golden era of pure artistic filmmaking or anything along those lines, but I think it would also be silly to look at all the movies which have been churned out over the past couple years and compare that to the relative paucity of actually decent or even good movies and say that, oh yeah, there's an equality here. Corporations and studios which used to be turning out great movie after great movie are producing nothing but reshuffled garbage for all intents and purposes. There is a sort of nostalgia mania, as well as just simply putting things on repeat, which has gotten very monotonous and at this point is just annoying me and needs to go away. But the point that I'm trying to really draw from all this, because now I'm already rambling, which expect more of this if you're a faithful subscriber, and which reminds me, I'm not playing any of my characters. I'm playing myself, so you're seeing the real me. Leif is the closest out of the three brothers, but this is how I act in real life. But since I'm not any of my characters, that means I also don't have the integrity of any of my characters, which means I get to shill for the channel. So be sure to smash that comment button and be sure to like that bell so that way you never have to miss any one of my videos from the future time forward. Furthermore, I interact with all of my viewers, so make sure that you press the subscribe button below. Wait, back to the point I was making. You can't ultimately make a good product without a good mind and a solid intention behind it. And the reason for that, it's not even a matter of this sort of moral order in the grand scale sort of thing. It's a matter of simple practicality. If your priority is making money, then you are going... Let me rephrase that. If you and the rest of the people who are in charge of making the product what it is are doing it for the simple purpose of making money, with no real genuine artistic merit or real genuine artistic vision behind it, inevitably you are going to be making decisions oriented towards that goal rather than making decisions oriented towards making a good product. And here's the thing. There simply isn't a one-to-one correlation between making a lot of money and making a good artistic product. Those things are incidentally related to each other, sure, but they are not the same thing, and oftentimes they are inimical to each other. They are contrary vices. Not vices. They are contrary forces. That's a better way of phrasing that. Yes, I'm reading off of a script point. Deal with it. This is my first time really doing just a normal video, so you're going to have to put up with it. I see you. You're already pressing the dislike. And I don't care if it's because of the fact that you disagree with me or because of the fact that I'm breaking something along the lines of a fourth wall in this conversation. We're continuing with this, and you're going to deal with it. I've legitimately seen people say that they're cautiously optimistic. Which... Look, I'm not going to say anything else other than that was what people were saying about the Rings of Power. Just saying. I'm just saying. I have no faith in cautious optimism when it comes to these sorts of Middle-earth adaptations or shows or TVs or movies. Anyway, to get to the second point that I made last year, which I still think is totally valid and has been justified both by the Rings of Power and by everything else that's happened over the course of the past several years. Hollywood is a cesspit filled with degenerates and scumbags and all sorts of variety of evil and villainy.
You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Now, I'm not saying that every single person in Hollywood is like that. Not at all. There are probably plenty of good people in there. What I am saying is that the culture and the belief system and the actions that Hollywood as a corporation and as an entity, as a society, as a society, I almost used the Latin there because that's what I'm used to, as a society is just awful from a moral and intellectual standpoint. A variety of examples could be drawn from this. One was pointed out to me recently, how you see a lot of like younger or even child actors going into that system, and they start off as just these wonderful, wholesome, nice, and brilliant people. But generally, with very few exceptions, they end up getting sucked into this just awful culture that corrupts them and turns them into the most narcissistic, vile, and just all-round worst people that you've ever met in your entire life. And again, there are exceptions, like I keep mentioning. I'm not trying to condemn everyone, because ultimately it doesn't matter if there are some good people in Hollywood. The fact remains that this is not the place that I want stuff about Lord of the Rings to be constantly made. Because Lord of the Rings is special not just to me, but to people, because of the fact that it does offer a very strong moral vision. It offers an escape from even the usual Hollywood escapism. The reason for why people still think of it as a great fantasy work and as a work that has its own brilliance is because of the fact that it came from a particularly not very wealthy, relatively poor, for all intents and purposes, rural-minded gardener and studier of medieval England. All that stuff is an essential aspect of what makes the Lord of the Rings the Lord of the Rings. And if you don't show an incredible amount of talent in navigating those differences in your point of view with Tolkien's point of view, you're going to inevitably misunderstand the whole reason for why Lord of the Rings appeals to so many different people. And so basically, Hollywood isn't equipped to make an adaptation of Tolkien in general. It only sort of worked with Peter Jackson, and it just doesn't work otherwise. And it hasn't worked before then, and it hasn't worked since. Now, I guess this brings me into the caveats section of this video. I don't know who's writing this. I didn't check who's writing this, because I don't care who's writing this for the points I've already brought up. But it should be noted that we could have some very brilliant and very, very talented artistic people being brought on to the scene, which is good, which is fine. I'd rather watch a good-ish version of Lord of the Rings, at the very least, as opposed to another, well, garbage fire, for lack of a better term. I mean, as I said in September, garbage fires are fun, just as long as they're not burning copies of Lord of the Rings. And admittedly, part of this frustration and agony might just be because of the fact that I am someone who's very, very, very biased against adaptations in general. I don't like them generally. I find them pretty much only useful as a medium of introducing people to the original most of the time, which is maybe a little unfair just on my part. I'm sure that many people are going to point to a number of examples where adaptations either add a lot to the original or sometimes are even better than the original. I know that Jurassic Park is the usual example that gets brought up in these sorts of conversations. Honestly, to some degree, I do hope I'm wrong. At the same time, though, I'll admit, there is a genuine part of me that doesn't want it to be good either. Because for months now, I've been thinking about this. There is one specific good thing about the Rings of Power. And that's that no one would ever mistake that for a genuine representation of Lord of the Rings and of Tolkien's world. And the reason for why that's good is because of the fact, one of the problems that I've personally had with the Peter Jackson trilogy is that for many people, that is Lord of the Rings. People read the books and they think of those characters. They think of the characters that are in the movie when they're reading the Lord of the Rings books. Which, on the one hand, I'm glad that the Lord of the Rings movies were so good that they inspired so many more people to read the books. I mean, I was technically introduced to Lord of the Rings by the Peter Jackson trilogy myself. But ultimately, the point remains that it's really difficult for a lot of people, and it was even difficult for me for a while, to distinguish between Gollum as he exists in the Lord of the Rings movies and Gollum as he exists in the books. Which is unfortunate because of the fact that I do think that the book versions are generally better. People generally have a negative impression of Frodo when they're going into the books, and it's only after reading them a couple of times that they realize that no, Frodo actually really is a great character. He's not this whiny brat that he is in the movies, and he's not entirely passive like he is in the movies. That's a little bit unfair, but it's generally true in terms of a comparison. And so there is a part of me that just almost wants these adaptations to be terrible. I'm not genuinely hoping for that, just because I think that better art is an objective good that is just simply better for the world than objectively bad art, because that just makes the whole world worse. Even if everyone ends up throwing it by the wayside, it's worse that it was created in the first place. And so I'm torn. And I don't even really know how that's going to influence my own first watching of the series, but I guess we'll have to figure out, or the movies, or you know what I mean. I guess we'll have to figure that out when they come out, and I'll have to give my own thoughts and review after thinking about it. And who knows? Maybe this is just me inciting panic. I'd like to say that I generally refrain from doing this. I'd like to say that I'm generally level-headed and fair, and that really the stuff that I'm critiquing really is just that bad, and to whatever degree people disagree with that, it's just because of the fact that they don't see what I see. So, yeah, admittedly, I have nothing else to add here. I hope you all enjoyed, and I am actually really eager to hear what other people's thoughts on this are. If any of you think that it's going to be bad, I'd love to hear why you think it will be bad, or they will be bad. I guess it's multiple things. I should stop talking about it as if it's just one thing. If you guys have more information about it that you would like to share on why you think it might actually be good, by all means, please share. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, and maybe you'll even influence me and change my perspective on the whole issue. So, yeah, have a nice day.